Welcome to episode 3 of Project MX5SRCE. As you can see here, we're getting the new engine and transmission stripped down so that we can prep it for the reseal, the repaint, do a couple of modifications so that it'll work for this project. So enjoy this video. If you guys can't tell by now, the engine and transmission is actually from a 2002. It's a 1.8 VVT engine. The transmission is a 6-speed. And the reason I picked this is because it just is the most powerful engine that's a bolt-on for the early NA chassis. The VVT motor makes about a 26 horsepower, 25 torque over the 1.6. And the 6-speed is quite a bit more robust transmission, as well as it being a close ratio transmission compared to the 5-speed. As mentioned earlier, the motor only has about 60 to 80,000 miles on it, but again, it's from a 2002, which means it's about 24 years old. The rubber and everything seems to be in good shape, but again, it just feels foolish to reuse that stuff when it's right here. So we'll be taking all that off, all the way down to the block in the head to replace the seals and gaskets. Again, this motor is extremely clean with very little to no leaks, but here we're just going to put some engine degreaser on to break up some of the old grime, dirt, dust, just so that we can prep it for the refinish. So now that the block is all nice and degreased, we're going to put some engine primer on just so that the paint that we're choosing will stick nicely, especially with how hot this engine will be getting. And then for the block paint, we're just going to do a nice satin black. This is generally one of the number one things I recommend to do if your Miata motor is out, is to reseal the oil pan, even if it may not be leaking. This is mostly just because of how difficult it is to remove the oil pan when the engine is in the car. In addition to that, the VVT engine has a kind of a unique baffle plate. As you can see here, we're removing what is called the main bearing support plate, and what that does is it kind of gives it some extra support for the crank. Of course, as everything comes off, we're going to be refinishing it. And so for the oil pan and the valve cover, we're doing VHT's just aluminum paint to give it a nice stock look. Here's a really good RTV that I've had good luck with. It's Permatex's Right Stuff, and it's the Ultra Gray. It's a quick set, I think it's a 1-minute gasket actually. I've always used it for oil pans and valve cover seals, and they've always worked really well. Here's a closer look to those bolts for the main bearing support plate, how it actually connects the baffle plate to the crankshaft. So the MB motors use cam and crank sensors on the front of the engine, whereas the older engines use a CAS sensor. And what's really neat about the NB motors is if you take this delete plug on the back, you can just bolt on a NA CAS sensor as seen here. So instead of an NB1 fuel rail with an NA6 regulator upside down, Radium now makes a great bolt-on 1.8 fuel rail, which then we just use their end pieces to connect to the fuel lines. Once again, on this specific engine, all the oil seals and gaskets are in very good condition, but again, we're right there, so let's put some new ones on using our seal kit, which includes cam seals, crank seals, as well as some 3D printed tools. So here's a very important component that I think is overlooked a lot of times at a lot of generic shops, or people forget about, is the Woodruff key and the bolt. This is a pretty catastrophic place where people forget to either replace the components with new ones, under torque them, or just ignore them in general. And so I highly recommend replacing the bolt and the key. This is just to reduce the liability and risk that the crankshaft keyway gets damaged, which then requires you to either replace the engine or replace the crankshaft. Included in our time belt is the components that we just mentioned, the bolt and the key, as well as a bunch of other parts that we found to be necessary and what you should do during a time belt. So feel free to check out our time belt kit if you guys are interested. So for this part of the motor, we're limited to two options, either the VTCS intake manifold or the VIX manifold. We ended up choosing the VIX manifold, which we'll explain further in a later video. And then here we're connecting the NA6 fuel wiring harness to the engine. Here we're using an EGR delete because the NA chassis doesn't have an EGR system. So this product is from Flying Miata. It is their 1.8 liter throttle body adapter. And so what this will allow us to do is to be able to continue using the 1.8 intake manifold using their adapter, which then allows us to bolt on the 1.6 throttle body. So here we're using an NA8 alternator because it is self-regulated, whereas the NB ones were regulated by the ECU. As I said, everything rubber is being replaced, and so here we're putting on the Isle Motorsports motor mounts. And these ones are slightly stiffer than an OEM, but not as stiff or rattly as like a polyurethane. So these are one of our new kits as well. It's a bypass hose kit. It's all the small little intermediate hoses that connect the thermostat to the water pump outlet, etc. And so this specific kit actually is designed using all OEM components, but it's designed for the 1.8 swapped NA6 cars. So to kind of give a good overview of where we're at right now, we can, as you guys can see, this is an NB motor, but you can kind of see that I'm putting a lot of the NA electronics in. This is to complement that 1.6 ECU that I installed earlier in another episode. Here's another kit that we developed, was the water pump pulley bolts. We have two options, an Allen as well as a hex, both in a stainless steel variant. So as said earlier, this is the radium fuel rail, which is really a nice piece that we can use for the 1/8 swap. So you can see on the right side is going to be our feed line, and then on the left side on the top is where we're going to be installing the NA6 regulator. Allow us to pivot and actually make our fuel lines a lot cleaner than if you were to use the NB fuel rail. As you can see, the motor is not 100% sealed yet, but there are a lot of components that are still being worked on, welded, painted. And so we're just going to get this engine in so we can start making progress on another part of the build.
Okay.
Again, while we're in here, we're going to be replacing the rear main seal, not because it's leaking, it's because it's available to do now. And so we're using the OEM components, and then we're using the seal installers, which allow it to install at a perfect depth. So here's another product that we developed, is the resurfaced flywheel. This takes an OEM flywheel, we get it resurfaced so it's ready for a new clutch kit. Pair that with some new ARP flywheel bolts. That's always a good pair to do, just to get rid of those old ones that have been probably torqued a few times. And then we paired it with the Exedi. I consider it a half stage clutch. It's not necessarily the OEM one, but it's not up to their stage 1. It has a really good clutch grab, nice easy pressure plate pressure, so it's not a super heavy clutch like a lot of the heavier duty ones. So here, while the transmission is out, we're going to be removing the input shaft, and this is just so we can replace the input shaft seal, as you can see there. It does require to do a little bit of RTV on here because the 6 speeds do not use a gasket unlike the 5 speeds. With most new clutch kits, they always come with a new throwout bearing and a pilot bearing, so here we're going to be putting on the new Exedi throwout bearing to pair with that new clutch we put on earlier. Our transmission kit, which includes the input seal and gasket, also includes this output seal, which seals the drive shaft input. So paired with the new diff housing getting all painted, we're also putting some new bushings in. The bushings we chose here are the Isle Motorsports harder rubber bushing. For this build, we decided to go with the 4.3 Torsen from the NB1s. We just figured that this paired with the 6 speeds can be really fun. And then in addition to that, we got to develop a new kit, which is the differential housing mounting bolts. They include all grade 8 bolts with some new lock washers. If you worked on a VVT, you know how easy it is to strip these little bolts. Another cool little added piece here we got to make the engine more aesthetically pleasing is some stainless steel timing cover bolts. match the timing cover bolts with some valve cover bolts, again available in Allen as well as hex. And then lastly, for the stainless steel bolts, we got to also find the right bolts for the VVT solenoid, which also includes the pipe bolts that lead back to the oil supply line. One of the main theories I have for this build is reversibility. And so for that reason, we're making a lot of plug and play harnesses so that if we do need to make any conversions to go from the NA chassis to the NB motor, it can be 100% unplugged and we can put the original components back in if we choose to do so. So for the exhaust, we decided to keep it pretty much stock. Here we're using the NB2 header because it's the best factory header, 421 design. And then what we also ended up doing is we actually welded in a bung so that we could monitor the AFRs with a wideband sensor.